Shin Junseo felt like a useless D-rank blacksmith, the kind of person who was mocked whenever he introduced himself as a hunter. Deep down, he knew he would likely die as a worthless failure. Yet he couldn't help but dream of becoming stronger than anyone. Even as a support class, he believed his life could change, if he just had the power to prove himself. Finally, after much struggle, he was ready to step into the world as a player. On the day of his first dungeon raid, Shin rushed through the forest, anxious about being late. He met up with two other hunters, Kim Jimin, a C-rank hunter, and Lim Duan, who joked about Shin's tardiness. Before Lim could elaborate on his own experiences, Jimin interrupted, reminding him that he was often late himself. Shin apologized for his delay, and the three set off together. Lim lightened the mood by teasing that Shin wasn't too late after all. And Jimin added that they could simply walk the rest of the way since Hyunwoo and Do-yoon were already inside the dungeon. Shin couldn't shake his guilt. It had been 3 months since he joined the guild, and this was his first dungeon raid. To make matters worse, he was there as a support, which meant he had to prove his usefulness. When they finally met up with Hyunwoo and Do-yoon asked if this was Shin's first raid. Shin confirmed, explaining that he was there to provide support. Do-yoon advised him to be cautious, as supports lack the combat abilities of hunters. He emphasized the importance of maintaining the right distance, close enough to be protected, but far enough to avoid getting caught in the fight. Since Shin was a maker, his role was to stay back and create daggers when signaled. Do-yoon assured him that the dungeon was easy, and that Shin didn't need to overexert himself. Just then, Lee Hyunwoo detected mana, signaling the presence of monsters nearby. Lim instructed everyone to prepare for battle, and they moved into formation. Do-yoon asked Hyunwoo for details, and Hyunwoo reported 3 small mana signatures and 1 large one, a boss monster. Do-yoon found it unusual for a boss to stray from its designated area, but decided to take it on himself, assigning the others to handle the smaller monsters. He asked Shin how long it would take to create a dagger. Shin estimated around 20 seconds, though the weapon would last less than a minute. Do-yoon nodded, satisfied, and instructed Shin to start crafting immediately. As 3 blue monsters and 1 purple boss charged toward them, Lim raised his shield and slammed it into the ground with immense force. Kim swiftly took out one of the monsters with a punch, but she soon noticed that the creatures were healing faster than expected. She warned the group to be cautious. Meanwhile, Lee launched a fireball, eliminating several monsters in 1 strike. Lim suggested that Shin join the fight, and Shin marveled at the guild's seamless teamwork. Do-yoon called out to Shin, asking about the dagger. Shin confirmed it was ready, and threw it to Do-yoon, who infused it with dark aura, and used it to decapitate the boss in a single decisive strike. After the battle, Lim checked if anyone was injured, and Kim assured him she was fine. Shin, however, felt inadequate compared to the others. He couldn't help but think he was merely a maker of temporary daggers, contributing little to the team. Do-yoon approached him, asking if he was okay. Shin admitted he didn't feel like much help, but Do-yoon reassured him, explaining that his skill required consuming weapons, which were expensive. Shin's ability to create daggers on demand was invaluable. Do-yoon praised Shin for his work and expressed excitement about future collaborations. Shin felt a surge of motivation, thanking Do-yoon and vowing to improve. As Lim suggested they collect the loot, the ground began to shake. Kim wondered if it was an earthquake, but Shin noticed a wall crumbling, revealing a hidden pathway. Lee confirmed the discovery, and Kim grew excited at the possibility of hidden treasure. Despite Lee's caution, Do-yoon and Lim agreed to investigate, urging Shin to join them. The scene shifted abruptly. Shin found himself running for his life, pursued by a monstrous creature. He couldn't comprehend how things had gone so wrong. Everyone else was dead, and this monster, something that shouldn't exist in a D-rank dungeon, was closing in. It struck him, sending him crashing to the ground and spitting blood. Desperate, Shin created a dagger and threw it, but it had no effect. The monster attacked again, slamming him into the icy ground which cracked and revealed water beneath. As he fell, Shin's thoughts spiraled. He wondered if this was how it would end, a D-rank support, unable to even use basic buffs like healing. He had finally found a guild that needed him, yet here he was, running like a coward. He questioned whether he should have ever become awakened, believing it was a dream beyond his reach. Suddenly, a screen appeared before him, announcing that he had discovered the spring and fulfilled all the conditions to become a player. As the message displayed, a bright light enveloped him, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. A screen appeared in front of Shin, displaying a notification that he had received a new reward and needed to decide whether to check it. He found himself pondering over this player concept and the nature of the reward. For a moment his mouth hung open as he considered drinking some water, but he quickly snapped himself out of his daze. He thought to himself that he didn't fully understand what was happening, and honestly, he didn't care. Deciding to act, he selected yes. Suddenly, a massive dagger materialized, forming a set of stairs that allowed him to climb out of the ice and stand up to face the monster. The system's voice echoed in his mind, informing him that he would inherit the experience of his previous life, and that the reward distribution had been completed. Utilizing his newfound power, Shin summoned several swords and launched them at the monster. The swords struck their target, and the creature was swiftly defeated. Shin was left bewildered, wondering what had just transpired. He felt unfamiliar memories beginning to take root in his mind, but before he could fully process them, the monster lunged at him again. Reacting quickly, Shin conjured a giant shield just in time to block the attack. When the monster's punch slammed into the shield, Shin was shocked to find that he had taken no damage. Despite being a golem-type monster with incredible durability, the shield held at least temporarily. However, the monster's next strike shattered the shield, forcing Shin to step back. Drawing on the information from the emerging memories, he recalled that even though it was a golem-type monster, its weaknesses and the tactics to defeat it should still apply. The problem was that the monster didn't seem to have any obvious weak points, and it possessed a regeneration ability that made it even more formidable. Determined to gain the upper hand, Shin decided to use his skill, Grid World. The skill allowed him to materialize a grid within an equal distance radius, enabling anything created within it to move freely according to his will. It was recommended that he attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Shin unleashed the attack, sending the grid to strike the monster from all sides, breaking it into pieces, and finally killing it. Initially, Shin had thought of Grid World as merely an auxiliary skill, something to help him use his creations more efficiently. However, as the skill's proficiency grew, it became clear that it could also function as a powerful offensive ability on its own. A system window popped up, indicating that the monster had been defeated. Shin felt a mix of curiosity and confusion. Why couldn't he see the information about the dungeon monster? Suddenly, a purple aura gathered around him, and a magic ball appeared in his hand. The system notified him that he had activated the passive skill Magic Absorption, but Shin still had no idea what that meant. His thoughts wandered as he tried to make sense of the memories from his previous life. He could clearly recall a future where the world had fallen, filled with horrors too terrible to describe. Somehow, he had absorbed the experiences and knowledge from that future, but he realized it might not be the same future as the world he was currently in. Many things didn't add up, and the status screen in front of him was something he had never encountered in his previous life. It finally dawned on him that he had truly become a player. According to his memories, the term player referred to those few individuals who were chosen and had undergone an awakening. In his previous life, players didn't exist. In fact, 2 years from now, only a small number of awakeners would be selected to become players. A blue screen, visible only to those chosen, would appear, and a mysterious force called the System would shock all awakeners worldwide. It sounded almost like a joke, but it was enough to leave everyone in disbelief. The System wasn't the only thing granted to players. They also received unique rewards, strength, and skills that far surpassed what they had as awakeners. These rewards seemed to come out of nowhere, and once players began using them, their growth exploded compared to other awakeners. Thanks to the efforts of the guild leader, who was one of the first to become a player, the Dome Guild the guild Shin was part of had grown into a top-tier organization. While Shin hadn't played a direct role in that growth, it had been the catalyst for his development in his previous life. Standing confidently in a developing guild, he had once thought it was convenient when he first heard about it, but now he truly understood the advantage it had provided. He thought he could check the skills he would learn, and their proficiency in the system window, which was incredibly convenient. If his skill proficiency had carried over from his previous life, the skill he had used on the golem's corpse was something he hadn't possessed back then. He hadn't heard of any other players with a skill like that, so he wondered if it was unique to him. The skill gathered energy from contaminated mana, and he had a vague idea of how to use it, but he decided to think about it later. For now, he turned his attention to the other dead bodies, deciding that taking care of them was the priority. The scene shifted to the Hunter Association headquarters, where a woman asked a man if they had simply sent Shin home. The man was confused and asked what she meant. She explained that it was strange. A small guild had attacked an unconfirmed dungeon, resulting in an accident where 4 out of 5 members had died. The only survivor was a D-rank supporter. She said she would have understood if he had run away while the other hunters were fighting, but that wasn't the case. Shin had even taken care of the bodies and reported everything to the association. Since the gate had already disappeared, they couldn't confirm anything further. She then asked the man what he thought, mentioning that something felt off. The man questioned whether she really believed a D-rank supporter could kill a hunter. He patted her head with a file and told her to wake up, reminding her that this wasn't a civilian case. Even if something strange had happened, they couldn't figure out what had transpired in the dungeon. The woman mentioned that it was troubling, and the man agreed, noting that such incidents seemed to be happening more frequently these days. He explained that hunters who found a great dungeon and didn't report it were a problem. If they reported it to the association and it went to auction, all they would receive was some prize money. Instead, many chose to risk their lives by entering secretly, as it was almost impossible for a small guild to win a bid on a gate. He told her to call him if they needed additional investigation, and she agreed. As the man left, he glanced at the file, noting that the boy's name was highlighted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this case. The boy's behavior during the investigation hadn't been calm, which was understandable given his lack of dungeon experience, and the fact that he had just witnessed a tragic accident. However, despite some missing details, Shin had explained everything clearly. Perhaps it was just his personality, but something still felt wrong, though the man couldn't pinpoint what it was. It was frustrating, but he decided it wasn't something to worry about for now. He would have to investigate further himself. Meanwhile, Shin was walking while using his phone, unable to shake the feeling that something was off about the unconfirmed gate. The dungeon didn't exist in the memories of his previous life, and when a guild member had checked the gate bid form, it had the association's stamp on it. Yet, it was still listed as an unconfirmed gate by the association. Someone must have impersonated the association and tricked the Doan Guild, or perhaps the association itself was involved. What bothered him even more was that this wasn't an isolated incident. As the investigator had mentioned, there were already multiple cases involving unconfirmed gates and missing people. Shin noticed a common theme among the guilds mentioned in the news. They all had players in them, like guild leader Doyun, and even prodigies who would be called heroes in the future. It seemed as though someone wanted to erase the existence of those heroes. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Shin decided he needed to hide his abilities for now. He would remain the only survivor of a missing person case that would likely remain unsolved. If he acted suspiciously, he would be caught immediately. He had about 2 years until the first player selection to prepare. During that time, he needed to use every skill at his disposal and develop even more. He had to find a way to grow without drawing too much attention. As he checked his usable skills, he found something interesting and clicked on it. A year had passed, and a group of individuals found themselves deep in a forest, battling ferocious monsters. As one of the boys struck a monster, his sword shattered, and the creature retaliated, sending him sprawling backward. He barely managed to land safely, but the monster lunged at him again. He attempted to dodge, while those around him watched in terror. It was then that they realized the monster they were facing was a Null Lord. The boy spoke up, recalling that such creatures only appeared in E-rank dungeons, and should, in theory, freeze to death. He also remembered hearing that even among D-ranked monsters, a Null Lord was notoriously difficult to defeat. The monster charged past him, targeting another member of the group. The second boy raised his shield to block the attack, but it was clear he was struggling. He warned the others that if they continued to rely solely on defense, they wouldn't survive much longer. The first boy paused to think. He remembered the grim reputation of Null Lords among low-level hunters. These creatures were not only physically strong but also resistant to magic, which was unusual for monsters of their rank. Typically, low-level adventuring parties relied heavily on magic to defeat monsters, but the Null Lord defied this logic. Hunters who were usually confident in their magical abilities now found themselves terrified, and the price for their overconfidence was often the complete annihilation of the party. The boy realized they only had one member who specialized in pure physical damage, but he was terrible at hand-to-hand combat. His weapon had been destroyed, and he had no spare weapons left. He couldn't understand why the second boy was urging him to attack the monster when he was clearly unarmed. The boy, whose name was Jan, regretted his earlier decision to minimize the number of people in the party and include a magician. He realized now that this choice had led to their current predicament. As he scanned the area, he noticed another boy mining in the distance. This boy was also a helper, but he seemed completely unfazed by the chaos around him. Jan wondered why this helper was acting so carelessly when the rest of the group was on the brink of death. He watched as the helper's weapon disappeared and began to suspect that the boy might have some aptitude as a maker. Though he didn't expect much in terms of quality, he decided it was worth asking for help. Jan called out to the helper, whose name was Shin, and asked if he was a maker capable of crafting a sword. Shin agreed, and Jan requested a sturdy, strong sword. Shin apologized, explaining that he had joined the group as a helper, not a support member. Jan snapped back, saying it wasn't the time for excuses. Didn't Shin realize they were all about to die? Even Shin would perish if they didn't manage to defeat the boss. Shin began crafting the sword, but mentioned one condition. Once they cleared the dungeon, Jan had to forget everything about Shin's abilities. Additionally, when Jan received his share of the rewards, he would have to pay Shin the equivalent of an average support member's fee. Jan scoffed, doubting the quality of Shin's work. After all, if Shin couldn't even secure a job as a maker and was stuck working as a helper, how could they expect to clear the dungeon with his weapon? Shin laughed in response, saying it was ironic because good weapons were essential for clearing dungeons. He assured Yan that as long as they had the necessary tools, they would succeed. With that, Shin began crafting the sword. The scene then shifted to the Overkill Guild, one of the 3 major guilds in Korea. A girl knocked on the door of the president's office, and he called for her to enter. She informed him that the Awakeners Association had requested their cooperation, particularly regarding a dungeon with a rank error. She agreed with the president's assumption that, while the request appeared to be for cooperation, the association was likely willing to pay whatever Overkill demanded. The president noted that the other guilds didn't have much of a choice. The girl added that there were very few Awakeners capable of entering a gate that had been forcibly closed. The president was watching the news when he saw a report about a group of hunters who had entered a dungeon with a rank error. As he looked at the group's photo, he spotted Shin and realized he had seen him before. A few weeks earlier, a dungeon with a rank error had appeared in Suicidal, and the president had been dispatched to the area. He had dropped by the scene and remembered seeing Shin there. According to the report, Shin was listed as a helper. Rank error dungeons were still rare, and survivors of such dungeons could be counted on one hand. Shin had participated in 2 parties where everyone had survived not once but twice. The president couldn't dismiss this as a mere coincidence. The girl mentioned that rank error dungeons seemed to be appearing more frequently. Just a few days earlier, an E-rank dungeon had transformed into a B-rank one, resulting in the instant annihilation of the entire party. The president remarked that the Awakeners Association must be under immense pressure. The girl added that many people were criticizing the association, as it was their responsibility to estimate, analyze, and announce the rank of a dungeon. The president thought to himself that the association must be struggling. He suggested that those in their guild with the trespass skills should take on more commissions and monitor the situation closely. He then asked the girl about the task he had assigned her, finding a weapon maker of A rank or higher. She replied that she hadn't found one but had obtained a B rank weapon from a Japanese blacksmith. She asked if he wanted to test it. The president declined, explaining that any weapon below A rank would be destroyed as soon as he used his skills. He stood up and instructed her to continue searching, as he was reaching his limit of wasting weapons. Just then, someone entered the room and informed the president, Tahin, that something had happened. Tahin asked for details, and the man explained that he had checked the location of the dispatch request sent by the association. It turned out to be a D-ranked dungeon where some of their new recruits had entered as part of a free attack team. Tahin asked about the measured ranks after the entries, and the man revealed that the dungeon had been reanalyzed as a C rank or upper C rank. Tahin, looking serious, stated that he couldn't afford to lose his new recruits. It was an urgent situation, so he decided to go there himself. The scene shifted to the dungeon gate, where the media was reporting on the situation. The crowd saw President Tahin, accompanied by the girl and the man who had informed him of the crisis. Reporters began asking Tahin to comment on the ongoing issue of rank error dungeons. One reporter mentioned that the association had sent a cooperation request to Overkill for the dungeon entry, and asked if that was the reason Tahin had come in person, because his guild members were part of the attack team. A woman thanked Tahin for coming and revealed that the attack team consisted of 6 hunters, 2 supporters, and 1 helper. All of them had higher than required qualifications. But those numbers didn't matter now, as the dungeon had been reanalyzed as a C rank. Tahin asked how long it had been since the attack team entered, and the woman replied that it had been almost 2 hours. Tahin stated that he didn't know how many were still alive but would do what he could. Tahin, along with Min Husu, the girl who had accompanied him, stood in front of the dungeon gate. She handed him a sword, and he used his skill, Trespass, to slash through the air, creating a flare of energy that caused a strange black area to appear ahead. The skill allowed him to forcefully push through barriers, including dungeon gates, but it only affected the user, not the surrounding area. The sword broke as a result. After handing it back to Min, Tahin told her to be careful, and she wished him the same. He then entered the dungeon. Inside, Tahin noted the humidity, temperature, and foul smell, deducing that the dungeon was inhabited by some kind of reptile. The absence of pollutants on the floor suggested that the monster had a level of intelligence. Based on the dungeon's rank, he concluded that the monster was a lizard man. As he moved forward, he crossed numerous dead bodies of monsters, using the lizard man corpses to estimate the size of the group and their fighting capabilities. He also noted the level of distress the party had been in, as identified in the preliminary report. He feared the worst-case scenario that they were all dead by now. Suddenly, he heard a rumbling sound. Moving closer, he arrived at the location of the party and saw something he hadn't expected. A monster was attacking a hunter with a sword, while the other hunters continued to battle. Tahin observed from the side, noting that the lizard men were clearly overwhelming the group. Their speed and movement indicated that they were far stronger than the hunters. He saw one of the lizard men strike a hunter's sword, sending it flying. The monster was about to attack the unarmed man when Shin appeared, using his magic to create a sword out of thin air and block the blow. Tahin, still some distance away, wondered if it was magic. How else could a weapon materialize so suddenly? He watched as Shin used his abilities to craft the sword, and their eyes met in a brief but intense moment of recognition. Shin quickly counted the people around him. When he reached Tahin, the 10th person, he remarked that he was certain only 9 had arrived. Tahin, confused, wondered what Shin was talking about. Just then, another lizard man knocked a hunter back and prepared to attack. Tahin rushed in with his sword to intervene. Shin was astonished that Tahin had come to rescue them personally, especially since he was carrying a weapon he didn't even use. Shin speculated whether it might be a sphere weapon. Tahin blocked the lizardman's attack with his sword and ordered the others to fall back. With a swift motion, he unleashed a series of slashes, creating flares with his sword that cut down the lizardmen instantly. Tahin thought to himself that he hadn't even used his full strength yet. The weapon was clearly B rank, but it felt surprisingly weak to him. As Tahin defeated the lizardman, another one appeared and lunged at him. Tahin dodged the attack, causing the lizardman to crash to the ground. Shin approached Tahin and asked if this kind of wear and tear always happened when he used his skills, commenting that it seemed like the weapon suffered serious damage. Tahin wondered if Shin was trying to pick a fight with him. Shin then called out, urging Tahin to use his weapon properly and avoid destroying any more of the fragile weapons. Tahin was taken aback when Shin materialized a weapon with a single gesture. Not only was Shin a weapon maker, but he was also exceptionally skilled and competent far beyond the average. Tahin couldn't comprehend why someone so talented was acting as a mere helper. He had heard that low-grade supporters often took on helper roles due to financial constraints. Shin took Tahin's weapon and mentioned that there would be a condition. Once Tahin cleared and left the dungeon, he had to forget everything about Shin's skills and Shin himself. Tahin raised an eyebrow, asking if Shin thought he could simply forget because Shin wanted him to. Shin replied that if Tahin didn't agree, he could go ahead and smash all his high-class weapons. Tahin considered the offer. He knew the weapon might break the moment Shin used a skill on it, but having more weapons couldn't hurt. Reluctantly, Tahin agreed, promising to forget about it. Shin smiled, saying that was great, and told Tahin to go wild. Tahin rushed to attack the lizardman, flaring his sword and breaking the monster's weapon. Shin watched in surprise, having expected Tahin to merely deflect the attack. Instead, the opponent's weapon was destroyed first. Tahin's control over his weapon was far beyond what Shin had anticipated. Shin wondered if Tahin's weapon was just that much stronger. Intrigued, Shin thought to himself that the weapon maker must be capable of manifesting at least a B-rank weapon on the spot. This was getting interesting. Shin decided to test the weapon's capabilities further. He cranked up the power, stabbing the lizardman and using a fire blast. After that, he jumped behind the lizardman, stabbed the weapon into its head, and released another blast of fire. The lizardman spat out green blood as it collapsed. Tahin stood there staring at the weapon Shin had made, now covered in blood. To his surprise, there wasn't a single scratch on it. Before he could ponder further, the newbies from his guild appeared, calling out to him. They thanked Tahin, saying it was because of him that they were alive and safe. Tahin replied with relief, noting that none of them seemed badly hurt. They explained that they hadn't been able to fight with their own weapons, but had managed to hold out thanks to Shin. Tahin turned to Shin and asked for his name. Shin wondered why Tahin would want to know the name of a mere helper. Tahin replied that they should at least know each other's names and introduced himself. Finally, Shin approached and introduced himself as well. He mentioned that he would leave the magic stones at the dungeon's entrance. The others agreed, but Tahin asked Shin to accompany him to the boss room. Shin hesitated, stating that he was just a helper. Tahin insisted, explaining that the dungeon had turned into an error dungeon, meaning no one could leave unless the boss was defeated, whether they were a helper or a supporter. Shin responded by saying that Tahin was more than capable of taking down the boss himself. Tahin countered, pointing out that, as Shin had seen earlier, no other weapon could handle his skills. No matter how skilled Shin was, it would be pointless if he just ended up smashing the weapon Shin had made for him. Shin assured him that the weapons he made wouldn't break. Tahin argued that while Shin might believe that, this was an error-class dungeon. The creatures here were far beyond the average lizardman, and if the boss was as strong as he feared, no amount of caution would be excessive. Shin eventually agreed and began moving, his steps echoing as he followed Tahin. When they reached the boss room, they encountered the Lizard King and another lizardman. Tahin suggested that Shin should disregard any previous danger levels or information he had, and focus on ending the fight as quickly as possible. He warned that if they took too long, his weapon might snap in two. Shin once again assured him that the weapon wouldn't break, and added that if Tahin didn't believe him, he could test it out himself. That's it for today. Make sure to subscribe and comment below with your thoughts on this recap. Thank you all for watching.